Okay, guys, welcome back to another episode of Coffee Talk with Liquid Shano 1973. Whoa, we have the live version, the video version, and all kinds of stuff going on. We are now broadcasting on Facebook, on my Liquid Shano 1973 page, and we're broadcasting on YouTube at the same time as I'm having this podcast right now. So as you're listening to the audio version, you're going to be able to actually go in and see the video version and all that stuff. So it's pretty exciting stuff going on, guys. We're moving up in the world here at the podcast, and all thanks to all of your support and love and all that good stuff that you guys give to me all the time. It really helps me to be able to move forward. But today's episode is a pretty special one here. It's a guy that I've been talking to for a long period of time. We've been in connection through Instagram and some other social media aspects. He's a member of No Finish Line Nation. He has a really good message and a really positive feel to himself. And I promised all of you, my podcast listeners, we were going to start to bring in some guests to be able to have some conversations, to really open up that dialogue versus just me and one microphone. Now I want to bring in some other folks to be able to add some color to it. So I want everybody to welcome Daryl Perry to the podcast. Hi, Daryl.
Hey Shane, we're any and everywhere right now, man. This is awesome. This is an excellent setup.
Yeah, man, I'm pretty excited about the whole entire thing. I know that you personally play in the space of all the social media aspect, and you're on Instagram and you're on Facebook and you're on TikTok and you got all this stuff going on. And it's just a new venture, a new way to be able to do it. And I really love it because it really brings a personal approach to it. You know what I mean? On the podcast, which I love, I've listened to yours so many times. And you have a good rapport with your guests who are on the podcast and everything. But I almost feel like there's a personal touch to when it comes to video, isn't it? Like almost like that, oh, wow, that's what they look like. And that's what their mannerisms are and stuff, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's subtle differences between any type of content that you put out, and podcasting is great because you're literally having a conversation with somebody and you're listening in. You're privy to some inside information, but at the same time you don't get to see who's talking. So yeah, doing not only video but doing live stream, I mean, it's a whole nother environment, and
It is.
it's exciting, man. It really is.
Yeah. What I love about live is this. It's who I am. Right. So if I make a mistake and I fall on my face, that's okay. That makes us who we are. Right.
Absolutely.
All right, man. So if you don't know, guys, on the listeners of the Coffee Talk podcast here, Daryl is very much in a similar kind of frame of mind that I'm at, about positivity and really bringing a lot of great stuff to the table. I want to get to know him today a little bit more through the podcast here. And then I also want him to be able to dive into a little bit of the things that he's working on and some of the different avenues that he's working on, everything. So we'll get right into it. You ready, Daryl?
Fire away, Shane. Let's go.
Okay, man. All right. So I met you on the internet. I met you on Instagram and through Jonathan Giordano and myself, and all of us kind of got to know each other a little bit better because we know the dynamic of men when it comes to whether it's not necessarily fitness, but weight loss, fitness, health, all that stuff. Men don't normally speak up too much about it. So you resonated with me. So let's start off right off the bat here, Daryl, with tell us a little bit about your story. Where did you start? What are your beginnings a little bit, and just kind of walk us through a little bit of your story.
Well, if we're going to go all the way back to the very beginning, I was actually born 3 months premature. I have a condition called cerebral palsy, and basically all that means, guys, is that when I was born, there was a lack of oxygen towards my brain. So any kind of brain damage that happens at birth like that, or just before or just after birth, is in that category. So each case is going to be a little bit different, just depending on what kind of damage was going on. But that really gave me perspective from a younger age, because I was in a situation where my parents actually had a similar case with what would be my older brother. He was born at the same time frame, long term, 3 months premature, and he lived for 3 days and passed on, and I'm still here. Yeah. So I mean, and it was, I mean, really, even when you get into the innocence of childhood, I literally would tell my parents, I can't wait till I can, go and see see Dwayne, after all this stuff is over. So,
right.
But yeah, I mean, so it was really what that really gets into with a lot of the stuff that we talk about, which is, which is fitness, which is dieting and all that. But what really stood out to me about you, Shane, was, there's not too many guys talking about feelings and emotions. And I think,
Yeah, I know.
I think the fact that you can get, you can get some regular guys to do regular things, but also have enough, awareness and confidence to actually put that out there. It tends to stand out. So, I mean, but I mean, for me as a kid, I always kind of kept to myself. I wasn't necessarily shy, but I was just, I was very guarded, and
Okay.
I
Were
was
you
all.
guarded because of the condition, or were you guarded more so just in general?
I think, I think it played in, I think both things actually played into it.
Yeah.
When you have something, when you walk into a room that you visibly are going to be different than anybody else that comes in, like it's definitely, you're always kind of like, okay, are they seeing that first, or are they seeing me?
Right.
And they're always seeing that first. And that just kind of is what it is. Other than that, I mean, I was an only child, so I was kind of your typical, very imaginative kid growing up. And I think some of that, honestly, like that translates into the stuff that I do now as an adult, with all the content and all the marketing type stuff.
Sure.
Yes, but I mean, part of what I would do to kind of cope with really any emotion, I mean, positive, negative, whatever, was food was always comfort for me.
Yeah.
And I started from a very early age, fortunately, because when you're in my situation, you spend a lot of time with physical therapists and orthopedics as a kid. And I did have one orthopedic that really, he turned me on to exercise as almost kind of like a rehabilitation type thing, or kind of like a physical therapy type thing. So starting that when I was, I would have been probably 12 years old when he first put me on that.
Yep.
I just kind of got into the habit of exercising, like kind of by default. I was aware of my weight as a kid, but I think I was conscious of it. The first time would have actually been a couple years later, right before I turned 15. I was actually actually at his office, and they were doing the weigh-in, and I remember seeing, like, I was like 210, and I'm not a tall guy. I'm only like 5'7".
Yep.
So that was the first time I was aware of my weight. And then all through high school, I started exercising. This was the late 90s. So it was like low fat diets were kind of the craze. I ate a ton of snack wells and things like, cardboard type stuff. But I mean, I actually, I mean, I took the weight off, but then what kind of started to happen, because kids, this was back in the 90s. So what we used to do to consume information was we would read books and we would read magazines. Yep. So I started reading like the exercise journal, like the exercise magazines, and Men's Fitness and Men's Journal and all that.
Men's Health and stuff. Yeah.
Yep. Gotcha. So you start getting into kind of like the same body image issues that you hear women talk about a lot. These are equal opportunity offenders. These brands are, because they market much of those images to us as guys as they do women. So that kind of stuff that always played into it. And then after high school, like through college, I was still pretty active. The last year I was in college, I actually worked at a gym. So I was kind of around. That was my first real exposure to kind of like the fitness industry and how all that works. It was still a really, really good time. But then after graduation, I ended up taking a job doing, it was an account management, account acquisition sales. So, and it was pounding the pavement. It was setting up appointments. It was following through and all that. And I ended up, just dealing with the stress of sales. And the one thing you learn after you've been in sales for a while is you do your best to not internalize it. Like, it's not you. Sales is basically a game.
Right. And it's a numbers game. It's a numbers game.
Oh yeah, it is. And this was any kind of like sales stereotype that you can think of, or any kind of like sales meeting stereotype. It was kind of like Boiler Room, as far as our meetings and such. But man. Yeah. So
great movie, by the way. Great movie.
It is. If you're starting a sales career, you need to watch that. And if you've been in sales for a while, and you've probably seen it, or you've definitely heard quotes from it.
Oh yeah.
Go back and watch it, because you'll be like, yeah, that's exactly how it is. But I got into this habit, whereas because my territory was all around town. I was selling advertising locally. And in between calls, I just started stopping. Sometimes it would be fast food restaurants. Sometimes it would be gas stations. Sometimes it would be like sit down restaurants. So there were some days, especially when the calls weren't, it's crazy. You take them through the sales system, and you're supposed to have no objections, and you're supposed to sell everybody. It doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. No, it
doesn't. So like Yeah, so I started, I mean, whenever I would have these experiences in sales, like I would eat whatever emotions I had.
Mm,
And this entire time, like it's interesting because I always exercised the entire time, but I was still going from diet to diet. And
right.
this was a long history. Like it was always, I have the goal number and I need to hit that number, and then I would hit the number, and then it was like, well, because again, you look at the Men's Health magazines, and it's like, get these shoulders for summer,
Yeah.
or get the six pack or whatever. So then it was like, well, I need to put more muscle on. So it was like this constant game of never being happy. And then I just remember at some point during here, I actually had switched jobs and went to a company that had a much more kind of a progressive culture when it came to company, like corporate wellness and overall life balance and all that other stuff. So like we had a big kitchen, we had a boot camp instructor that would come in.
Oh,
So
wow.
like, yeah, I had been dieting, and paleo was actually the last diet that I had been on.
Hmm.
And it was not, I never set out to do it this way, but like I just started taking the stuff that I liked from paleo and stuff that I missed that I wasn't, that wasn't part of that plan. And I just started, eating somewhat sensibly. And then I would exercise regularly, and pretty soon, like I was not dieting. So, I mean, and while that was going on, while I'm sitting at this job, and they were pretty, they would always want to talk to us about, like, where did we see as a career path, what kind of interest did we have outside of the company and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And it's just it's just so like I was doing this, and I'm like, you know what, I never got that personal training certification. I had no idea on what I was going to do with it, but
Right.
I wound up studying for and sitting for a training exam, and I had passed that. And then it just so happened in this office that I worked at, and this, between the time that I got the certification and then the time that I actually started teaching, my what would boot camps were really popular at the time. So there was a
Sure.
United Cerebral Palsy (UCP) that was just down the street from us there, probably maybe 5 minutes from this office. So I would go in there on Fridays, pretty much every Friday, and I would teach an adaptive exercise class. And
Oh,
this was
wow. That's
for,
great.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, this was adults with CP. Most of them had CP. There were other developmental delays and disabilities and stuff going on as well. But it was, we would typically have somewhere like 7 or 8, all the way up to like maybe 18 or 20 participants.
Yep.
And each class was different, and each person was kind of doing their thing. And it just, I did that for, I want to say, a little bit over a year. And then at that point, I was kind of like, okay, I'd been in sales. I wanted to get on the creative side, like on the marketing side. And the
Hmm.
company I was with didn't really have any opportunities for that. And I was starting to get into like personal development and things like that. And I started getting into some of these business books, and I'd gotten to the point where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to make the jump. I'm going to start my business. I filed for an LLC, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do personal training. I'm going to do group fitness. I'm going to do all of it.
Yeah.
And and at the time I was like, well, I'll build a marketing portfolio too, in case I have to go back into the workforce. Well, Shane, within the span of about 2 months, I found out that I was not at that point, an entrepreneur, and I couldn't do it on my own because it was a learning
Right.
experience.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, but I did wind up. It took me, I want to say it took me about a year between when I left the one company in sales, and then I was kind of hustling and scrapping and trying to figure out what I could do, to when I took a job at a marketing agency as a copywriter. And this was a traditional agency. They did some digital stuff, but it was a lot of like phone scripts and postcards, like
Did
just
you
kind of
have a
this.
degree, or did you have any kind of
I did.
a
I
thing
did.
to be able to work into that?
So yeah, I had a degree in marketing,
Yeah.
and but it was like, if you didn't, there was some more specializations in that, because marketing, while I think it's a great field to be in, a lot of just kind of your general business studies, at least at the school I went to, got degrees in marketing. So like when I would go out and apply for these jobs, I'm competing against everyone, and I really didn't have the skills.
Hmm.
So I'm working at the agency, and then I start this entire time, like I never, when I went back there, I said, I'm going to focus on this position that I have. I want to learn all the stuff that I can learn with what I'm doing, but
Right.
I'm not going to give up on the other stuff, because the fitness industry at that time was really starting to change. And it went from, boot camps and doing all kinds of in-person stuff. And I actually did a lot of, I was part of a running group here locally at a church
Oh, nice.
where, yeah. So why actually, that was another thing I ended up doing for a couple of years while I was at that one sales job, not the ad sales job, but the other one.
Yeah.
I was getting people going from couch to 5K and couch to 10K. So then I was seeing how the industry was changing, and I started going into, when you have your personal training certifications, every couple of years you have to do these continual education stuff, these courses. So
Yep.
I started really looking at nutrition, and because that was always, if I was going to really go towards anyone, it was either going to be the adaptive marketplace or it was going to be the busy professionals, because those are the two areas that I kind of played in.
Right. And they need it the most.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that's the thing, because again, when we're talking about dealing with stress, it's so easy to use food for that. And,
Right.
Another thing, and I know you and I have talked about this, it's okay to acknowledge that you use food for comfort, even when
Right.
after you've lost the weight and you've hit your goals and your fitness is just part of your life. Like, it's okay. Like we all do it. It's just, you have to be comfortable to where the level of comfort with food is up against the goals that you have for yourself. But it's never, it's one thing about all this stuff is it's never an absolutes. But what I started to notice, as I was getting into nutrition and I was getting into, fortunately, the company that I went and got a certification through also has a software platform that we actually could coach people through. If we purchased the license for it, we could actually build it into our business. So I started doing that some, but before I took anybody through it, I wanted to go through it personally, because I wanted the experience. I wanted to be able to kind of taste and feel it and see how it went. And then, as that's now kind of what the industry has gone to, is it's not just online coaching, but I know Noom is out there. Noom is big on habit-based coaching. The company I'm with, Precision Nutrition, they're part of it. And I think some of the Weight Watcher plans now are also based around habits. And I think part of that is because, the weight loss community as a whole, I think is tired of the diet mantra. So I think we're like, okay, don't just tell me what to eat. Let me figure out why it is that I have to eat this way.
Right. The mental side of it, the emotional side of it, like you said a minute ago, where if you can go down the road of knowing that you use food as a crutch sometimes, but know that you do that, and also arm yourself with things to be able to overcome that if you're feeling a slide coming around, right? Or something's coming around where you're like, okay, I know I'm teetering right now and I'm on the verge of, oh boy, I need to be able to read those signals. And I think that a lot of the brain work and a lot of the stuff that people are, like you just said, Noom and Weight Watchers and a lot of these other companies, even Jenny Craig and some of these other ones, are now really all about what's your lifestyle look like? What's your mental side of it? How are you feeling? Which is something we didn't talk about very much before. It was all about numbers, crunches, calories, fat, carbs, whatever. And that's all they talked about, It
was tell me what to do and I'll do it. And as I started doing this and kind of getting into the why, and this is where social media really came in, because like you, I have a lot of one-on-one conversations with people. I mean, my messages are always like my DMs and my Facebook messages. I've always got stuff going on in there. And like, I just, there were people that literally, like, they knew if they were going to tell, like, if somebody was going to say, Shane, this is what you need to do to lose weight. You need to do something that is around what you enjoy as far as exercise, what you're capable of doing. You need to build an eating plan around the kind of foods that you like. You just really need to take your time and make sure whatever it is you do, you can do for the rest of your life. But the interesting thing is when we get in those day-to-day stressful situations, we automatically, it's like we just go into those old habits because they kind of override everything. Yeah. And, so as I started, and that was the other thing, and this is somebody that puts content out pretty much all over the internet. There's kind of like this pressure to always come up with the latest message. So you've got to post something on Instagram. You've got to post something on Facebook. It can be a similar message, but it's got to be, it has to be different enough to where it'll get people's attention. And I started looking at this and saying, well, wait, I'm posting things about how people shouldn't focus on the scale. And I would have people say to me, I had this one post, this was like in January of 2018, I think, where somebody said, thank you, I needed to see this. And like a couple weeks later, I was in one of these things where I was like trying to get X number of posts out a day. And I was like, well, I don't have anything to post this morning. I know what I'll do. I'll go back and just basically, rewrite the caption a little bit. Instead of using a white infographic, I'll do like a tweet screenshot or something. And I put basically the same message up. And two of the same people that commented and said, I needed to hear this, like said it again. And I'm like, wait a minute. They clearly knew the information. Yeah. So this is where I was kind of like, okay, maybe you don't have to put out the latest and greatest new thing. Maybe we just get back to the basics. Mm-hmm. And then I started looking at it and saying, okay, if we do that, and let's go back and really think about what it was like as an individual, because I dieted for 15 years. I mean, I was that whole roller coaster. And then as I'm talking to people, I come across folks that are in their and it's all ages. You'll meet 20-year-olds that have been dieting since they were 12. Right. You will meet 30-year-olds that have spent over half their life dieting, and you'll meet people that are in their 50s and 60s that were doing the original Jane Fonda tapes back in the early 80s. Oh, yeah. Like they've just always been doing this stuff. So like then it became, okay, well, let me look at how the industry is really positioning things. And I told you about the magazines, and I had been a perfect target for all of these companies and this industry as a whole my entire life. I never really thought about it, but then I looked at it and I'm like, they're doing the same tactics, mm-hmm. and they're using much more sophisticated tools now. We need to take it, like there needs to just be an alternate message. So for me, it was kind of the general message I put out is look, don't focus on the scale. If you focus on what's right in front of you, following that eating plan that's based around your preferences. Yep. And then you do the exercise, like do whatever you're capable of doing right now, do it consistently. Now be careful, because you don't want to get into those perfectionist tendencies where you're like, okay, right. I have to work out today. I have to work out today. Yep. And just take your time. And, I then it was like, okay, if I continue to put this message out, like, is it going to make a difference? And I started getting messages from people, like some people I didn't even know, but I would get DMs from them like, I've been doing what you said to do. I've been setting goals the way you said to set them. And I'm like, I've lost X amount of pounds, but more importantly, I'm starting to look at this stuff differently. And I've always been somebody that's dieted. So, how this is
powerful. That's powerful.
Oh yeah. I mean, and you know how this is when you start getting those messages, yeah. That changes. I mean, that pretty much changes everything. And that's in a nutshell, that's my story.
Yeah.
But yeah, man.
Well, so that's a very long-winded answer, but I'll tell you what, I like it because what it does is it gives us a good snapshot of your story. I think that a lot of people, if they're watching you or they're hearing you, or when you're on No Finish Line Nation or you're on Instagram or whatever areas that I've see you on, and when you do your podcast, I think if people can find out the dynamic of who you are as a person, and to know that internally, think about this, right? So, okay, so you had a brother, you lost your brother at a very young age, or, baby, basically. And then you grew up as a kind of a person that was using fitness at around the 12 years old to be your outlet, right? To be your coping mechanism towards being that introvert and things like that. These are all really important, because if you think about it, who you are today is really a fabric of everything that has been laid out through your whole life, right? And absolutely, you're going above and beyond, and you're digging in with people that need the same type of coaching that maybe your fitness person or the guy that gave to you back in the day with just that, because that was your medium. That was your, okay, I've got a way to be able to channel this and be able to move it forward. That tells a lot of your story. So I think that's really important. And I'm glad you shared that, because I didn't know a lot of the finite details of early days. But so let me ask you this, though. So here's the other question. So like I said earlier, it does have almost like a therapeutic piece to it when you have people that DM you or message you and say, your message meant a lot to me. And that's where it started with me too, right? So anybody on the podcast knows it started off with blogging. I was writing entries. I was writing down stuff, just notes, and almost like notes to myself to be able to say, here's what I'm struggling with as I'm on my weight loss journey. I'm on my health journey and mental health journey as I was moving forward. And then it progressed into podcasting. And I've got a lot of folks that literally reach out to me all the time now and say, your message, I need to hear it all the time. As a matter of fact, I have people that have, when I went on vacation for like 2 weeks or whatever, that were like, I need a podcast. Can I get a podcast? And so internally, I'm thinking to myself, man, so even if I reach out to one person and help that person, right, that's what I consider to be success. So here's what my question for you, Daryl. If you were to say, in the space that you're playing in right now, as we're both playing in the space, it's competitive. There's a large landscape. What do you consider success to be in your landscape of where you're at?
I'm making my messages for one person. If one person gets it, if one person messages me, or if not, like if they, because that's what you find out too. You'll find out that people are some of your biggest fans and they never tell you.
Right.
And, we have a certain, especially with podcasting, we have a certain level of analytics that'll tell us some things, but we don't necessarily know who's listening unless they tell us.
Right.
But and that's always been because, okay, so like on the content creation side, whether you're blogging, YouTubing, podcast, whatever, it's the numbers, the followers, the subscribers, that gets in a lot of people's heads. And there was when I was going to do the content creation the first time, I was going to be a blogger. I read, I mentioned, like, I went from self-development to give me every writing handbook that I can find. Let me get all the routines down. Let me get, in some cases, I was printing, I'd sign up for these email lists just so I could get the checklist of all the things I needed to do every day. And what happened, Shane, was I would literally sit at my keyboard. This actually the one that I'm sitting in front of right now. And like, I would write a bunch of titles. I would set up a bunch of drafts, but nothing ever got published. And it was because, well, I don't have enough people to read this. Nobody's going to read this. And I got into my head.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that happened. And I, until very recently, stayed away from the writing piece of it. Now, YouTube was always something that I kind of did, but I don't, look, as like a one-man show with no real background in production. And when I look at the two, could I learn how to do some editing and do some production? I absolutely could. Yeah. But eventually over time, I got comfortable just putting the message out. And it literally started to be, if one person consumed it and one person got something from it, right, that was enough. Because before I put that piece of content out, they didn't know. Now the podcast turned into something completely different because I was going to go down the same thing. Like, I had this idea that I was very clear. I wanted to give people practical tips that they could just use on their own every day. And I recorded one episode, and this was January 2018, January 4th, I think. And that was my Almost Daily Podcast, episode 1. There were a couple of the times where I'd actually downloaded the Anchor app probably over 6 months before then, but I had never really done anything major with it. So then I did one episode, and I didn't record another one until February 22nd. And then I just made a deal with myself. It didn't matter if the episode was a minute long or a half hour long. I was just going to put something out every day. Yeah. And, I'm actually,
have you still kept that cadence throughout the whole time, every day?
For the most part. And I'll go in spurts, to where I am putting I've put multiple episodes out in a day. I've kind of staggered it a little bit just because I want people to be able to catch up. The ones, because there are a few people I know that catch every episode, which, again, as busy as everybody is, the fact that people will even listen to what it is you have to say and take time out of their day is another huge compliment. But the way I looked at it, because it went from me doing these tips, and then I was not going to do any kind of interviews. And then Gary Cantrell, a podcaster, was talking to me. We'd met through a mutual friend. He brought me on for an interview. I even say on his podcast, I'm like, because I was nervous about doing interviews, because you know how it is. The first time you talk to somebody, there's that whole, there is that flow, there is that cadence. You're talking over each other at first, and it's just kind of awkward to move through. And I think at that time, like, it really, I was kind of nervous about it. But then I started interviewing some people, and it again just kind of started to take off, and it went from there to where I had people where we would do interviews, and then they would come back for other episodes, and then it was kind of like, well, we've got enough here that we might want to do a couple of different, maybe we can do a weekly show. So like I've got a handful of shows that I do different that I do weekly, and then what it's come down to, you mentioned if I keep the everyday cadence, I can tell you, because I checked the numbers on it the other day, since January of 2018, I put out 975 episodes. So I know. So if you guys watching need a podcast,
that's right. Watch this little special thing I'm going to put at the bottom of the screen here. I think I got it here.
Let's see.
There it is. The podcast, the Daryl Perry Show, right there. Right.
Yeah, no, it's the Daryl Perry podcast. But I'll tell you what, if you guys just put my name in iTunes or Spotify, it comes right up.
Watch this, man.
Yeah, look at this.
Watch this technology I can do real quick. Daryl Perry podcast. Let's see if I can get that in there.
See, this is what happens when you have actual editing skills.
Boom.
There you go. Boom.
No, listen, I think it's really great because I mean, that's a lot of episodes. So it's interesting because when I first started the podcast here, I was doing every day or every other day for a long time because it was my therapy. I did it for me more than anything else at first, to be honest with you. And I was on there journal, and I would just talk about, oh, I'm really having a crappy day today, or I'm having a great day today, or I was working through, staying on track with the calories that I was eating, or whatever I was doing at the time. And as I've navigated through it, it got to the point where I had to whittle it down a little bit more to do like once a week, and just for my sanity and for my work life and my family, right? So that I got to balance all this stuff out there. So kudos to you for all the episodes. And what I do love about yours is, and I've listened to many, many, many of your podcasts, it like you said, it could be anything from a 5-minute, hey, I'm just checking in to say, what's up, how you doing, to a lengthy, hearty dialogue, conversation, in-depth look at the brain work and other stuff, which of course that's my cup of tea because I love that stuff. I love just really digging into the nooks and crannies. So kudos to you. And like I said, everybody, I've got it right at the bottom here, the Daryl Perry podcast. Go check it out on any of the platforms. It's a really great one. So tell me a little bit about the Positivity Ninja, Daryl. I want to know a little bit more about this. Tell me more.
So the Positivity Ninja came out of, I was doing stories once, and it was just about on Instagram. And I was like, I was just tagging people that I said were positive. And I'm like, and I just, you know how it is when you do this stuff without a script, unrehearsed. I was like, these are some of the most positive people I know. These are positivity ninjas. And what was interesting about that is I tagged 10 people because that's all you can tag in one Instagram story. So I tagged 10 people, and every single one of them DM me back, and they're like, thank you, but I'm not a positive person. And this eventually clicked with me that I'm like, well, you know what? Maybe we also need to talk about what it really means to be a positive person.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that you never have a negative thought, or that you always have your head in the clouds. It's that you have enough self-awareness, which is the game with everything we're talking about. That's the whole thing when you're building your eating and exercise plan. That's the whole thing when you're working on your mindset. It's all about the self-awareness. So like if you have enough awareness when and you could be going through the most garbage situation there is, and I will never dispute that somebody's going through a really tough period in life, or that somebody has had so much garbage thrown at them through their entire life that they feel beaten down and they doubt themselves. I'm never going to debate that. I look at it and say, you know what? Well, let's really frame what being a positive person is. A positive person is, let's say that you have 28 negative thoughts in a day. It's going to be much higher than that because there's so many thoughts that go through our head. But let's say that you take the time, you've got the awareness, and you're like, I've counted 28 negative thoughts. Well, the next day you have 27. Well, that's progress. The next day you have 23. That's progress. The next day you have 31, but you're aware of it and you're not being drugged down by it. You're trying to make your default mindset a positive one, your default outlook on life positive. And that was a message that I started putting out. I then, because of the wonders of the time that we live in now, there was a graphic design service where you can submit ideas for graphics. So I sent them this thing because I'm like, well, what does a positivity ninja even look like? So I'm like, I'm writing this up. I'm like, I just want a ninja riding a unicorn.
Oh my
And
God. I
they
love it.
came back. They came back with it, and I had no idea.
Can you see it?
There it is. There it is. And that it really pops on there too, man. Like,
I love it.
yeah. So like, so they sent that back, and I put that on a T-shirt, and that was the same thing as I started getting messages from people, and it was just like, I love it, I love it, I love it. So then people started tagging in as positivity ninjas, and it really, it's one of those things that took off, and it's now, as you can see, it's now stickers, it's now sweatshirts, T-shirts. You know how the whole merch game works. You can put pretty much anything on everything, and that's
exactly. You know what's funny is that I'm going to touch on something that I loved that you just said was is you never know what resonates with people. Okay. So Positivity Ninja, I love it. I love the concept of it. I love watching Kung Fu movies and ninja movies anyway when I was a kid. So I'm all about it anyway. And then unicorns, what can you, I mean, seriously, you really can't do anything worse than that. It's great. So what I did is I was sitting back and I said, okay, over on, I know both of us are just started to kind of dabble a little bit in TikTok, right? The whole video aspect of putting these little clips out, 15-second to 60 seconds videos and staying consistent. And again, much like we're doing with the podcast, if you're consistent with your message and you're consistent with the things you're doing, you can really build something. So I'll tell you a story real quick. So it was about, I think it was on April 1st, I think it was. So it's about 18 days ago or so, or 20 whatever days ago. And on April 1st, all I did was I did a short video, and it was me holding up my Mickey Mouse coffee mug. And on the mug, it says, make someone smile today or something like that, or you have a way of making people smile. Yeah. And all I said in there was, hey, guys, good morning. All I want you to do is tell me where you're from, throw your mug in the air, and then say good morning, right? So all of a sudden, about 3 days later, I'm sitting there, and my wife is on the couch, and I'm over here, and I'm just kind of scrolling along TikTok and Instagram and everything else. And I get a couple DM messages on TikTok from people that said, hey, listen, you might want to go check out that video because I feel like people are using the audio of that. And I went, okay, all right, because that's what they can do there. You can actually, use another audio and then lip sync or things like that. So between the 3rd of April until yesterday, the audio of my voice just saying that and the video with a duet on there where they can kind of partner up with each other and stuff like that has been used almost 1,600 times, 1,600 times in that short amount of time. And it's everywhere. Daryl, I counted all the states. All 50 states were covered. Everybody checked awesome. Every 50 state. And like, I think it was like 17 or 18 different countries around the world, Romania, Puerto Rico. So here's the thing that I was thinking about after I got done with that. I mean, I'm literally, it's still going like all day today. It was like another 100 or 200 more that I was like, so I thought to myself, you never know what your outreach is until you go and do it. And like you said earlier, you touched on, you were afraid to kind of just put your stuff out there. So was I. Just, okay, I'm going to put it out there. I got, who's going to listen to this guy? I'm a guy with a beard and a hat on backwards and do whatever. But you never know who you're going to touch and how you're going to really make an impact. And I feel like you're making impacts and stuff like that. It blows my mind with the impact that we can have globally, thinking about just with positive message. And all it was a cheers of a mug with coffee saying, hello, how you doing, where you're from, and let's meet each other. And that was it. It was crazy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I'll tell you, and that's what actual, in the know, they call it content. But I mean, all it is you're putting stuff out, you're putting things out that are fun. And if you ask yourself the question of like, what kind of stuff would I like to consume? 9 times out of 10, like somebody else, it's going to resonate with them because at the bottom, at the back end of all this, we're people, and we're emotional creatures. We have things that we go through. And sometimes, we just want to have a cheers and good morning with a Mickey Mouse coffee
Especially
cup,
in today's society, right?
Well, yeah. No, and that was something I know, first off, and what I got to say about you and TikTok, because I signed up for my account back when it was Musical.ly, and my profile was, I'm literally, because our sons are pretty close in age. So I remember my profile was, I'm just here to embarrass my middle schooler.
Oh yeah.
And so I have to ask, given the fact that you've had that many duets, what does your son think about just his dad blowing up on TikTok?
Well, it's funny because we joke about it sometimes. That's the exact reason. Okay, I'll tell you the story. So my sister, she came up from Virginia this last Christmas, and we were all sitting around, and we're all sitting around having a couple drinks, and we are just kind of like just reminiscing and stuff like that. And my sister says to me, "Hey, you need to download this app. It's called TikTok." I said, "Oh yeah, I saw commercials for that, or I saw something or whatever." And she goes, "Well, the reason I want you to do it is my sister's a cop, right? So she's always kind of like thinking ahead of the game of the kids nowadays and the things they're being subject to and whatever else. She's got 2 daughters, so she was like, I watch it to be able to see what my daughter is subject to, and I want to be able to make sure." So she did a more of an investigative piece of it. But what ended up happening is that she got my wife to download it, and so during the holidays, my brother-in-law and I were making fun of them because they're sitting on their phones the whole entire time, just bopping around on TikTok, just bopping around. And so then all of a sudden, I had a buddy of mine. I went over to there's a guy that runs a local podcast studio in Portland.
Okay.
And so I helped them kind of build it up. We put some framework of some sound studios, and just I've been really involved with it. Trying to build a podcast community in Maine. And I went over to go visit him one night, and he says to me, he goes, "Hey, you should get into the TikTok." And I went, "What?" This is the second person that's brought it up in like the last couple of weeks. He goes,
Yeah.
He goes, "They need people like you." He goes, "Because you're always positive and you're always trying to look at some way, even though you're not always a Pollyanna positive, you're a realist. You understand that stuff happens sometimes and you got to keep moving forward." He goes, "But every time I walk away from a conversation with you, Shane, you always have a framework of how can we be the best version of what we can do moving that forward." And he goes, "And I think we need that in places like that, because even the kids that are on there can probably use a little bit of, hey, you're awesome, let's keep moving forward," versus just all the degrading stuff that goes on with social media.
Yeah.
And so right then and there, I downloaded it, I got on there, and I use it similar too, because I was telling my son, I was like, I'm watching what you're watching. But now it's funny because every once in a while, he actually gets involved in the videos. The other day, he did, I was celebrating this woman's comment that had put on there, "I'm really proud of being a mom." And so I turned the video around backwards, and my son was coming down on his skateboard. And I said, he did an ollie on his skateboard for the camera. He kind of fell down, and we were making fun of it and laughing. It got all kinds of traction, but it was so good. And it's just funny because, to your point, I in a short amount of time, which is really great. I've got like 1,500 people on there that are all like, "Hey, listen, tell me more and tell me more." And I love your positivity. And they're starting to share it and they're starting to spread it. Listen, if it can become a movement that way, why not, man? You know what I mean? Everybody needs to start believing in themselves a little bit more,
Well, and that's one. You're not just on TikTok. You're actually doing the things that are the subtle differences to TikTok. Like you're doing the thing. I'm like, because they tell you the way to learn all this stuff is that you sit and watch for hours or days or whatever, and then you just test things out. And I'm at the point where I'm like, I know that I need to test some things out on there more, because right now I'm basically whatever I would put in an Instagram story is kind of what I'm doing on TikTok right now, and then I share it to Instagram. But yeah, and that's crazy that you've just really been doing it for such a short period of time, because you're cool. You're doing it. It's working for you, man. And I think positivity, and I've been calling it, especially since the quarantine stuff started, realistic optimism is what I call it. Because I mean, you can't be like, you can't act like nothing is going on. You can't ignore what's going on in the world, and you can't ignore the fact that, look, people are sick, people are dying, people are losing their jobs, people like it, and there's so much uncertainty around all this. So like at first, and because I mean, I know you felt this way too, like I'm somebody that puts out a message of positivity, but I mean, underneath all of it, like I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel comfortable putting the stuff out. And then I started thinking about it, and I'm like, you know what? Because you see, I mean, people are on their screens now more than they've been ever. And it's like, you know what? I almost have a duty.
It's an obligation almost.
It is to actually cut through the noise for somebody. And again, like we were talking about before, we're doing this for one person. So like gradually I've kind of figured out how to adjust my message. I know you have too. And I'm coming around and I'm more comfortable with it. But yeah, man, I mean, it's so important. And when you talk about a movement, and that was, I've got two parts of what I'm trying to do. I have my basically Folks Anywhere, which just started as my company that's Year Level Fitness. It just started out as hashtag YLF community. And I swear for the longest time, like the first probably couple hundred posts, it was just me adding it to my hashtags. And then it just started catching on with some people, and people started sharing it. And now like there is an entire community. And my whole thing is if you're somebody, it doesn't matter which plan you're following, doesn't matter if you're, keto, it doesn't matter if you're Noom, if you're Weight Watchers, or if you're doing CrossFit or you're running. We all need encouragement, and we all need to stay consistent, and we all need support. You're never going to be judged here. Everybody's welcome. So that was kind of a message behind it. And people started using it so much so. And I loved this. Like on Instagram, what they started to do to kind of make this more inclusive is when they would use the hashtag YLF community in their story, they're tapping it a couple times so that they can get the rainbow effect on it. There's just kind of a subtle message that, hey, you know what? No matter who you are, no matter what you're doing as a person or in health and fitness, you're welcome here. And I mean, to this point, it's gotten like over 6,000. It's tagged in like 6,000 posts, most of which are not me either. There you go, man. Like are you sure you don't have an editor? This is crazy.
No, man, it's me.
Like real time.
Check it out. They pop up right on the screen. You pick my. I didn't know that was the hashtag. I just follow you. I always just follow you, or I follow. You know what I mean? It pops up in my feed and gives me alerts whenever a thing comes out. So I have to check that out with that hashtag. That's great.
Well, no, and that's why I'm enjoying this so much, because like that's why for the first 20 minutes I'm like, oh man, Shane wants me to tell my story. Let me see if I can condense this part in like 20 minutes, and then we can have the actual conversation. But yeah, man, I mean that came out of it. And then what really kept me going with the podcast is what people say all the time is I just need somebody to follow me around and slap the food out of my hand. What I started saying was this is the next best thing, because what happens with a podcast is if I'm reinforcing the message and I say it in a slightly different way, because I might be talking about maybe I'm talking about, I don't know, cutting back on salt. I don't know, cutting back your sodium. But I talk about it one time, you hear it, but the way we all consume podcasts, we're like usually working or we're doing stuff around the house, we're doing whatever. So like it may not hit with you. Maybe I talk about it 2 or 3 weeks later, and just because of maybe you had a visit with your doctor, an e-visit at this point, and you were thinking about it, and then you hear me talking about reducing your sodium intake, and then you're like, oh, so then you start to listen up a little bit. Then you send a message afterwards, and we have a conversation, and the back and forth that you and I have on that conversation is also going to help shape that message the next time I talk about it on a podcast or do it on social media. But what started happening, the biggest knock when I worked at the gym in college and when I worked as a personal trainer in the studio, is that you're really only with people a couple hours out of the week. So you take them through a workout, you can talk about whatever you're talking about while they're in front of you, but you have no idea what's going on for the rest of the week. Well, what happens, and I'm sure you get these messages too, with people passively listening to your podcast, you're always with them. So I'll have people that are out making food choices for lunch, and they'll remember something I said on a podcast from 3 months ago, and they'll like message me and tell me. So I'm like, well, wait a minute. I literally can be with people on a scalable level and reinforce not just the practical fitness stuff, but the mindset stuff as well. So, I mean, and again, when you start looking at it that way, your thoughts as an individual on, is this a good enough piece of content to come out? I have been blessed in such a way that where I've had a piece of content I thought was going to be fantastic fall flat on its face, and something that I thought was going to be straight garbage that I just threw out because for no other reason, that actually resonated with people. So
you know what I was just thinking about that the other day. One of my number one episodes of the podcast, one of the most downloaded very quickly, and the word spread pretty quickly throughout Weight Watchers, throughout Connect, throughout NFLN, throughout everything, was the episode that I did. It was about 6 or 7 episodes ago, and the theme of the episode was, it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It was just a basic, like you said earlier, it's okay to live in the space of sadness or anger or grief and those kind of things. It's okay to live there for a period of time, because you have to battle through those things. Your body has, if you try to shut them out all the time and say, I'm good, I'm a stoic, you'll fall apart. And then if you continue to live in that space, then you'll also fall into depression and all these other things. So you got to find a balance of knowing that you got to battle through grief. I didn't know, to be honest with you, that was going to take off as much as it did through the content wise. But I got messages after messages going, I needed to hear you say it's okay not to be okay, because I don't feel okay right now. And I'm like, okay, so let's talk about that for a little bit, right? So I almost felt like I was being a coach on the back end with all the DMs. But I loved it because I think people need to realize that in the society and the place that we're in right now, especially with all the COVID-19 and everything else going on right now, with all the stresses, it's okay to park there for a second, maybe cry it out sometimes, maybe get into a room and just like get that frustration out. If you have to do it, it's okay to do that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's interesting with that particular message, because you've probably got people that are not only hearing their own voice in their head telling them that, they've got to be tough and they've got to be strong and suck it up and all this, but they probably have voices from other people throughout their life. And the way that you said it and the way that the message came across in that particular episode, it hit them, man. I mean, it is powerful.
It is
what this stuff can do. It really is.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Listen, man, you know what? I think we're going to have to do a episode 2 one of these days here for another podcast, because I want to dive into more of the windings of Daryl Perry. But listen, where can people find you? Let us know. I know I put a couple of the places down here, but tell us everything, all the different places that they can go to find you, where you're located, how they can check out any of the different things you're doing. Give us a list of everything right now.
So number one thing you'll want to do is go to yourlevelfitness.com. Go to yourlevelfitness.com/blog. And I'm actually building that out as a searchable database to where you can look by topic, you can look by format. Format would be podcast, video, article. I want to provide as much resources for folks as I can. I'm going through the backlog right now, but I got 5 years worth of content, which should be about a couple thousand pieces by the time I get done. For you guys to look to. The other thing, you can listen to the podcast that Shane and I were talking about, the Daryl Perry podcast. Another podcast that I'm starting, it's probably going to be the first week of May because I'm collecting the interviews right now, is going to be the Your Level Fitness podcast. Now, if you search on Spotify, that's going to be there.
Is it all one word?
Nope. It's going to be separate. It's going to be Your Level Fitness. And it's going to be interviews. And I have a set questions that people start with, but it's a weight loss podcast, but we don't talk about weight loss until like kind of the very end. It's basically actions, habits, and routines. So people will tell you what they've learned, what they do, give you resources, and then they'll be like, oh, I've lost X amount of pounds, or I'm trying to lose this weight. So I want to do something that is focused not so much on the scale. So if you check out that new podcast, you check out the current podcast, and you go to the website and just kind of find the information that'll help you. That's what I really want. I mean, you mentioned that I'm a coach and that I'm a trainer. I'm really trying to get away to where I still do coaching, I still do training, but I think people can try to solve this stuff on their own, and all the stuff that I've been able to figure out in this whole space, I'm trying to make it available so folks can work through it themselves. So definitely check those things out.
That's really great, man. I know I personally love your message, and I love the different positivity things you bring out to the table. I also love every time I pop into my Instagram and I've got a little audio file from Daryl as he just popped in and goes, "Hey Shane, how you doing?" It means a lot, right? Because if you're playing in this space and you're putting your stuff out there and you're bringing that positivity and you're helping folks, sometimes you do feel like you're on an island every once in a while, right? You're like, oh, does anybody really know? And then all of a sudden you get things like that. So I'm always appreciative of our friendship. And I know that there's some things that John and I were talking about, trying to get a few of the guys together on our other 2 kitchen tables and a microphone on that live feed that we have there. We'll probably map something out within the next few months to have a bunch of you guys on there, so we could just have a round table discussion about guys and the way we think about things and the things we struggle with too. But I appreciate you being on my podcast, man. I appreciate all the different things you're doing out there. It means a lot to me, and I'm sure it means a lot to every one of those people that are out there that follow Your Level Fitness and Daryl Perry and everything you're doing, man. So I'm really appreciative of it, man.
Thank you for all the stuff, Shane, and the friendship and checking in on me, and I check in on you, and thanks for having me on, man. This
Okay,
was a lot
buddy.
of fun.
All right, guys. So you guys all know how to find him. If you guys want to go check out Daryl, Daryl Perry's stuff, he's the inspirational guy. He's the head of the Positivity Ninja movements, and I love that. I rock that sticker everywhere I go. So thanks, Daryl, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Shane. Talk to you soon. See ya.